Good evening. Welcome to day 16 of reading challenge. Chapter 30. The raging the raging tempest rushed whistling between the wheels of the carriages, about the scaffolding and round the corner of the station. The carriages, post, people, everything that was to be seen was covered with snow on one side and was getting more and more thickly covered. For a moment there would come a lull in the storm, but then it would swoop down again with such onslaughts that it seemed impossible to stand against it. Meanwhile, men ran to and fro, talking merrily together, their steps crackling on the platform as they continually opened and closed the big doors. The bent shadow of a man glided by at her feet, and she heard sounds of a hammer upon iron. "Hand over that telegram," came an angry voice out of the stormy darkness on the other side. "This way, number 28." Several different voices shouted again, and muffled figures ran by covered with snow. Two gentlemen with lighted cigarettes passed by her. She drew one more deep breath of the fresh air and had just put her hand out of her muff to take hold of the doorpost and get back into the carriage, when another man in a military overcoat, quite close beside her, stepped between her and the flickering light of the lamp post. She looked round, and the same instant recognized Vronsky's face. Putting his hand to the peak of his cap, he bowed to her and asked, "Was there anything she wanted? Could he be of any service to her?" She gazed rather a long while at him without answering, and in spite of the shadow in which he was standing, she saw, or fancied she saw, both the expression of his face and his eyes. It was again that expression of reverential ecstasy which had so worked upon her the day before. More than once she had told herself during the past few days, and again only a few moments before, that Bronsky was for her only one of the hundreds of young men, forever exactly the same, that are met everywhere, that she would never allow herself to bestow a thought upon him. But now, at the first instant of meeting him, she was seized by a feeling of joyful pride. She had no need to ask why he had come. She knew as certainly as if he had told her that he was here to be where she was. "I didn't know you were going. What are you coming for?" she asked, letting fall the hand with which she had grasped the doorpost, and irrepressible delight and eagerness shone in her face. "What am I coming for?" he repeated, looking straight into her eyes. "You know that I have come to be where you are," he said. "I can't help it." At that moment, the wind, as it were, surmounting all obstacles, sent the snow flying from the carriage roofs and clanged some sheet of iron it had torn off, while the hoarse whistle of the engine roared in front plaintively and gloomily. All the awfulness of the storm seemed to her more splendid now. He had said what her soul longed to hear, though she feared it with her reason. She made no answer, and in her face he saw conflict. "Forgive me if you dislike what I said," he said humbly. He had spoken courteously, deferentially, yet so firmly, so stubbornly, that for a long while she could make no answer. "It's wrong, what you say, and I beg you, if you are a good man, to forget what you have said, and as I forget it," she said at last. "Not one word, not one gesture of yours could I ever forget." "Enough, enough," she cried, trying assiduously to give a stern expression to her face, into which he was gazing greedily, and clutching at the old door post, she clambered up the steps and got rapidly into the corridor of the carriage. But in the little corridor she paused, going over in her imagination what had happened. Though she could not recall her own words or his, she realized instinctively that the momentary conversation had brought them fearfully closer, and she was panic-stricken and blissful at it. After standing still a few seconds, she went into the carriage and sat down in her place. The overstrained condition which had tormented her before did not only came back, but was intensified and reached such a pitchful that she was afraid every minute that something would snap within her from the excessive tension. She did not sleep all night, but in that nervous tension and in the vision that filled her imagination, there was nothing disagreeable or gloomy. On the contrary, there was something blissful, glowing, and exhilarating. Towards morning, Anna sank into a doze. sitting in her place, and when she walked, it was daylight and the train was near Petersburg. At once, thoughts of home, of husband, and of son, and the details of that day and the following came upon her. At Petersburg, as soon as the train stopped and she got out, the first person that attracted her attention was her husband. Oh mercy, why do his ears look like that? She thought, looking at his frigid and imposing figure, and especially the ears that struck her at the moment as propping up the brim of his round hat. Catching sight of her, he came to meet her, his lips falling into their habitual sarcastic smile sarcastic smile, and his big, tired eyes looking straight at her. An unpleasant sensation gripped at her heart when she met his obstinate and wary glance, as though she had expected to see him different. She was especially struck by the feeling of dissatisfaction with herself that she experienced on meeting him. That feeling was in an intimate, familiar feeling, like a consciousness of hypocrisy, which she experienced in a relation with her husband. But hitherto, he- hitherto, she had not taken note of the feeling. Now she was clearly and painfully aware of it. Yes, as you see, your tender spouse, as devoted as the first year after marriage, burned with impatience to see you. He said in his deliberate, high pitched voice, and in that tone which he almost always took with her, a tone of jeering at anyone who should say in earnest what he has who should say in earnest what he said. Is Seriously quite well? She asked. And is this all the reward? Said he. For my order, he is quite well. Chapter 31. Vronsky had not even tried to sleep all the night. He sat in his armchair looking straight before him or scanning the people who got in and out. If he had indeed on previous occasions struck and impressed people who did not know him by his air or unhesitating composure, he seemed now more haughty and self-possessed than ever. He looked at people as if they were things. A nervous young man, a clerk in a law court sitting opposite to him, hated him for that look. The young man asked him for a light and entered into conversation with him, and even pushed against him to make him feel that he was not a thing but a person. But Vronsky gazed at him exactly what as he did at the lamp. And the young man made a brave face, feeling that he was losing his self possession under the oppression of this refusal to recognize him as a person. Vronsky saw nothing and no one. He felt himself a king, not because he believed that he had made an impression on Anna. He did not yet believe that, but because the impression she had made on him gave him happiness and pride. What would come of it all he did not know. He did not even think. He felt that all his forces, hitherto dissipated, wasted, were centered on one thing, and bent with fearful energy on one blissful goal. And he was happy at it. He knew only that he had told her the truth, that he had come where she was, that all the happiness of his life, the only meaning in life for him now lay in seeing and hearing her. And when he got out of the carriage at Bolgova to get some seltzer water and caught sight of Anna, involuntarily his first word had told her just what he thought. And he was glad he had told her it, that she knew it now and was thinking of it. He did not sleep all night. When he was back in the carriage, he kept unceasingly going over every position in which he had seen her, every word she had uttered, and before his fancy, making his heart faint with emotion, floated pictures of a possible future. When he got out of the train at Petersburg, he felt after his sleepless night as keen and fresh as after a cold bath. He paused near his compartment, waiting for her to get out. Once more, he said to himself, smiling unconsciously, once more, I shall see her walk, her face. She will say something, turn her head, glance, smile, maybe. But before he caught sight of her, he saw her husband, whom the station master was deferentially escorting through the crowd. Ah, yes, the husband. Only now, for the first time, did Vronsky realize clearly the fact that there was a person attached to her, a husband. He knew that she had a husband, but had hardly believed in his existence, and only now fully believed in him. With his head and shoulders and his legs clad in black trousers, especially when he saw this husband calmly take her arm with a sense of property. Seeing Alexey Alexandrovich with his Petersburg face and severely self-confident figure in his round hat with his rather prominent spine, He believed in him and was aware of a disagreeable sensation such as a man might feel tortured by thirst, who on reaching a spring should find a dog, a sheep, or a pig who has drunk of it and muddied the water. Alexei Alexandrovich's manners of walking with a swing of the hips and flat feet particularly annoyed Vronsky. He could recognize in no one but himself an indubitable right to love her. But she was still the same, and the sight of her affected him the same way, physically reviving him, stirring him, and filling his soul with a rapture. He told his German valet, who ran up to him from the second class, to take his things and go on. And he himself went up to her. He saw the first meeting between the husband and wife, and noted with a lover's insight the signs of slight reserve with which she spoke to her husband. No, she does not love him and cannot love him, he decided to himself. At the moment when he was approaching Anna Arkadyevna, he noticed too with joy that she was conscious of his being near and looked around, and seeing him turned again to her husband. "Have you passed a good night?" he asked, bowing to her and her husband together and leaving it up to Alexei Alexandrovich to accept the bow on his own account and to recognize it or not as he might see fit. "Thank you, very good," she answered. Her face looked weary, and there was not that play of eagerness in it peeping out in her smile and her eyes. But for a single instant, as she glanced at him, there was a flash of something in her eyes, and although the flash died away at once, he was happy for that moment. She glanced at her. Expe- she glanced at her husband to find out whether he knew Vronsky. Alexei Alexandrovich looked at Vronsky with displeasure, vaguely recalling who this was. Vronsky's composure and self-confidence here struck, like a scythe against a stone, upon the cold self-confidence of Alexei Alexandrovich. "Count Vronsky," said Anna. "Ah, we're acquainted, I believe," said Alexei Alexandrovich indifferently, giving his hand. "You set off with the mother and you return with the son," he said, articulating each syllable as though each were a separate favor he was bestowing. "You're back from leave, I suppose," he said, and without waiting for a reply, he turned to his wife in his jesting tone. "Well, were a great many tears shed at Moscow at parting?" By addressing his wife like this, he gave Vronsky to understand that he wished to be left alone, and turning slightly towards him, he touched his hat. But Vronsky turned to Anna Arkadina. "I hope I may have the honor of calling on you," he said. Alexei Alexandrovich glanced with his weary eyes at Vronsky. "Delighted," he said coldly. "On Mondays we are at home. Most fortunate," he said to his wife, dismissing Vronsky altogether, "that I should just have half an hour to meet you, so that I can prove my devotion," he went on in the same jesting tone. "You lay too much stress on your devotion for me to value it much," she responded in the same jesting tone, involuntarily listening to the sound of Vronsky's steps behind them. "But what has it to do with me?" she said to herself, and she began asking her husband how Serioza had got on without her. "Oh, capitally, Mariette says he has been very good, and I must disappoint you, but he has not missed you as your husband has. But once more mercy, my friend, my dear, for giving me a day. Our dear Samovar will be delighted." He used to call the Countess Lydia Ivanovna, well known in society, a samovar because she was always bubbling over the excitement. "She has been continually asking after you, and do you know, if I may venture to advise you, you should go and see her today. You know how she takes everything to heart. Just now, with all her own cares, she is anxious about the Oblonsky's being brought together." The Countess Lydia Ivanovna was a friend of her husband's, and the center of that one of the coteries of the Petersburg world with which Anna was, through her husband, in the closest relation. "But you know, I wrote to her. Still, she will want to hear details. Go and see her. If you are not too tired, my dear, well, Kondraty will take you in the carriage. While I go to my committee, I shall not be alone at dinner again." Alexei Alexandrovich went on, no longer in a sarcastic tone. "You wouldn't believe how I have missed." And with a long pressure of her hand, and a meaning smile, he put her in her carriage. Thanks for the day. We'll see you tomorrow.